Shadow and Claw by Gene Wolfe, volumes 1 and 2 of the Book of the New Sun. So you may be familiar with, or at the least have heard of, the Book of the New Sun. It is a very, very highly renowned series of science fiction books, which are considered by many people to be either the creme de la creme of the genre or very close to it. These books are very highly regarded, and they achieved a level of acclaim at a time in which science fiction was not really as accepted in the literary mainstream as it is today. So that is a real feat in and of itself that these books achieved what they did, the level of acclaim that they did, because science fiction has kind of had a hard row to hoe to gain acceptance into the realm of literary credibility. But these books are considered true literature. And now, having read at least two of them, I can say yes, they are exceptionally literary. So, um, these are the first two books in the series. The series consists of 4 to 5 books. There are 4 books in the main series, and then there's a fifth book which serves as kind of a coda. So really 5 books in all. And the books are The Shadow of the Torturer, The Claw of the Conciliator, The Sword of the Lictor, The Citadel of the Autarch, and the fifth book, The Urth of the New Sun. This book right here is an omnibus which collects the first 2 volumes, The Shadow of the Torturer and The Claw of the Conciliator. And it really is kind of an oddity, I think, that I haven't read this sooner. Because I really like science fiction, and if this is considered literary science fiction written in an era where science fiction wasn't yet really commonly conceived of being literary, I by all rights should have been drawn to this like a moth to a flame. But like I said, it took me a while to get around to reading it, but now I have, or at least the first 2 books, and I gotta say, this shit goes hard. Like, this is truly kind of a thing unto itself, but up front, I loved almost every word of it. I'm so glad that I did finally get around to reading it, and I'm gonna tell you all about it. So, the plot, I'll just summarize these books as best I can, because these books cover a lot of ground. There's a lot of stuff that happens in these books, and the plot isn't like what you might expect it to be if you haven't read these books, in that it's not really, actually, it kind of, like, there is a plot, but it's much looser than typical science fiction is, because science fiction is kind of a genre known for plot, not so much for characters or prose or anything. But these books are distinct in that they're not driven so much by plot. I mean, there is a plot, but it's very loose and it's kind of meandering. So I'll just try my best to summarize these 2 volumes which comprise this book. And I'm not going to worry so much about spoilers, because I don't know if it's possible to spoil these books, at least in the way we commonly conceive of spoiling something, because with the Book of the New Sun, I think it's not so much the events themselves, but rather the significance of the events, which one really has to take heed of when reading. So even if I just lay out step by step the plot, I'm not sure you would actually be able to understand exactly what the gist of the books are or what the draw is. So I'm just going to blaze through the summary as best I can, because it covers quite a bit of ground. So, taking place in some kind of distant future Earth, although in the world of these books it's spelled Urth, Earth with a U. Taking place in some distant future Earth where the sun is dying, um, and where society has, even though there is advanced technology like space travel and robots and stuff, society has kind of regressed back to a retro medieval kind of structure. And also the physical setting of the books, it's never stated explicitly, but I think it takes place somewhere in South America, certainly somewhere below the equator, because there's a lot of discussion in the book about the what is basically the equator, the waste of the earth, kind of. I think it takes place in South America, and again, somewhere in the distant future, the sun is going out, and it takes place in what is known as the Commonwealth, which is ruled over by a ruler known as the autarch. And the narrator of these books, they are written in first person. They're presented as the memoirs of one Severian. And Severian, writing these books, tells us that he is himself the autarch now, which means at some point he became the ruler of the Commonwealth, the most powerful man in all the land. And these are his story. But also, there is a slight metafictional element to these books because each volume comes with an appendix, which is written by Gene Wolfe, like directly kind of breaking the fourth wall. And he is presenting these books as having been found by him in manuscript form and translated from some, future language somehow. So it's very involved. It really is. We've got somehow a book traveling backwards in time being found by Gene Wolfe, the science fiction author, and translated. So again, bear with me. There's a lot to cover here. But anyway, so sometime distant future Earth, that's Earth with a U, the sun's going out, and Severian, our narrator and main character, is an apprentice torturer. That's right. He lives in some kind of and has been brought up by a guild of torturers who are kind of the executors of the autarch's justice in this land. And Severian, early in the book, inadvertently winds up saving the life of a revolutionary outlaw named Vodalis. Um, and so then he also falls in love with one of the guild's prisoners named Thecla. And because of his love for her, he actually betrays his guild by helping her kill herself to spare her future torture at their hands. And these books are kind of graphic. This is definitely science fiction of the adult variety, and that becomes much more apparent as it goes on, both in terms of its content and its subtext as well. But anyway, so Severian screws up. He helps one of their prisoners kill themselves, and now he is at the mercy of the guild he has sworn to serve. But instead of being tortured and executed himself, he is instead sent out into the world to go be the executioner of a distant town called Thrax. And so he sets out. And also, he has a badass executioner's sword in his possession named Terminus Est, which I think that means literally this is the end or something like that. This is the end or this is the something like that. Anyway, so he sets out with his sword, and then he eventually meets up with this brother and sister pair named Agia and Agelus, and they, in a kind of convoluted scheme, try to have him killed in order to steal the sword. And so he goes with the sister named Agia to get some kind of deadly plant, which he has to do combat with. And he goes to these gardens, this kind of botanic garden thing, which I think somehow transports them back in time to like our time. I think it's, again, so much of this is kind of vague, but I'll kind of talk about that. Anyway, so they get the plant, and also they destroy the religious shrine of an organization called the Pellerines, I think, which are some kind of sisterhood of priestesses. And he also later finds himself in possession of a very, very valuable relic of theirs called the Claw of the Conciliator. And then he eventually overcomes the combat and then winds up learning of the double cross against him. Then he executes the dude, and then the sister named Agia is out for blood. So now he has an enemy, but then he also had wound up resurrecting, I think, a young woman named Dorcas from the gardens. She's been dead for we don't know how long, and he somehow recalls her to life. Don't know how, although that is a biblical name, by the way, and that kind of alludes to kind of the underpinnings of this work, which are highly spiritual in nature. Anyway, so now he sets out with Dorcas, and then he also in there winds up in the company of this giant ass dude named Baldanders and his physician named Dr. Talos, and they are like traveling mountebanks, and they're going to perform a play, which they kind of enlist Severian and Dorcas into. And then they meet this guy named Jonas. And then the first book kind of ends. That's all just in the first book, I think. So then the first book kind of ends. Then we roll into the Claw of the Conciliator. They got separated somehow, and now Severian and Jonas are traveling together. And then Severian gets lured into another trap by Agia, who is the woman who he made an enemy of in the previous book. Nearly gets killed, but then he gets captured by Vodalis, which is the revolutionary guy whose life he saved in the beginning of the first book. And so then he ends up eating the flesh of the woman whom he saved and was subsequently cast out for saving in the first book, named Thecla. And he also eats this potion made from the flesh of some kind of alien beast, which allows him to absorb her memories. So now he's kind of like two people in one body. It's some wild shit, y'all. Bear with me. Anyway, so then they get captured by the Autarch, and then it's revealed that Jonas is actually a robot. And then he disappears kind of mysteriously in some kind of teleportation device. And then Severian eventually meets back up with Dorcas and Baldanders and Dr. Talos and a kind of scientifically, sexually enhanced waitress with them that's traveling with them named Jolenta. Anyway, they perform this play, and we get the actual play recounted in the book, and it's every bit as wild as the books themselves are, and I think there's some kind of deeper significance with that play, but I'm not entirely sure exactly what the nature of that is. Anyway, so they perform the play. The giant ass dude named Baldanders goes ape shit, and then it reveals that there are actually aliens in the audience. Things go tits up. They got to get out of there, and then they split up. And then Severian and Dorcas and the waitress, the sex pot waitress named Jolenta, end up traveling together. And then they go into this stone town, like this stone ruins. They have where they see some like witches and this other dude who is also affiliated with Vodalis, the revolutionary. And then they participate in what I can only describe as some kind of like um, time travel seance, and then the book just kind of ends with Jolenta dying, and then all the books kind of end abruptly. And they all end with Severian saying, "If you don't want to read any further, I don't blame you. It's some it's some rough shit coming up." So anyway, that's the books, the plots, insofar as I can give them. These books are wild. If you didn't get clued into that, they cover a lot of ground. A lot of weird stuff happens, and it's so inexplicable, all of it, because um, we all of this is so alien to us. It really is, and that is really us marking the book's favor. I think is that it's able to portray this world that is so alien, but I'll kind of talk more on that. So, talking about the technical aspects of this book, the writing in this book is every bit as wild as the plots are. The Book of the New Sun, if you didn't know, is renowned not only for its literary qualities, but also for its very, very strange and archaic and obscure vocabulary. And like, that is like, I really don't think I've ever read a book that had so many words in it that I just did not have a clue as to the meaning of. You think after you read like some Cormac McCarthy books like Blood Meridian, you think that you've read some archaic words, but nothing can prepare you for the vocabulary of the Book of the New Sun. It is truly on another level. Just loads of words that I didn't know what they meant. No, but they kind of add to the aura of mystery about the whole thing. But the prose itself is really, really good. It really is. And I think that's a large reason why these books are as highly regarded as they are, because science fiction historically is not a genre that has been noted for having really stellar prose. But these books are at least were an exception to that rule. Gene Wolfe could write. I don't know that I would put this quite on the level of like Nabokov or McCarthy, but it's up there. Like it is truly real literary prose, and it's quite striking at times, and not just because of the crazy vocabulary. But anyway, so the writing is good. But now let's talk about the characters. So Severian is the narrator of the books, and subsequently he's basically the only character that we get a really in-depth look at, as he would be, since we're seeing it through his eyes. But he is a most remarkable character, and also not the most likable character as well. The Book of the New Sun is noted for having one of the most prominent examples, at least in science fiction, of the unreliable narrator. And Severian fits that bill in more ways than you might imagine. So, to begin with, he tells us early in the book that he is insane. He just says that I'm insane. But then that kind of begs the question: how crazy are you really if you know that you are crazy? So it's kind of that raises some issues. But beyond just being insane, Sverian tells us that he has basically an eidetic memory. He tells us that right at the start of the book. He's like, every word I've ever heard, every sight I've ever seen, I can recall all of it just as pristinely as when it happened to me. I remember everything and I don't forget anything. And so these books are presented as just being like truly like gospel truth. However, it's not too long after that, and it kind of happens over and over again, where Severian will be like, I don't really remember what happened at that point. So again, that kind of raises the issue: is how good is your memory, or how good is your honesty? So that it kind of makes you wonder, either he's lying about having a perfect memory, or he's lying about other things in the book. But Severian is also an unreliable narrator in another way, because so much of what he describes he doesn't understand. And because he doesn't understand it, we damn sure don't understand it. Like a perfect example of this, which you can kind of read into, happens when Severian, early in the first book, goes to meet this guy who's cleaning some old pictures or tapestries or something, and he describes this certain image that he's seeing as a picture of a knight with a reflective, like, visor thing in a barren, dusty landscape, planting his pennant in the ground, or what he takes to be a pennant, what he takes to be a knight. And it's kind of just like described, and it moves on, and you don't think there's any real significance there. But then when you go back and read that, and you kind of like think on it, it's like, oh, that's like the moon landing. It's like Neil Armstrong planting the flag in the ground. It's like in the moon. It's like, oh, and then it makes you wonder how many other things in this book also you have to read into, because I think, and I've only read the first two volumes, but I think the Book of the New Sun is probably a book or a work that you have to pay attention to almost every single word in order to fully understand, because it is noted as being one of the most cryptic things out there. There are like entire forums of people that try to dissect these books and figure out what means what and what the significance of this or that is, because these books do not hold your hand. They cover so much, and they give so much information to you, and it's in kind of such a garbled and unreliable way that you really have to give it your utmost attention to parse the sense out of it, if you can indeed. But I love that. This is truly this is almost what you might call postmodern. It is. I think you could probably describe the Book of the New Sun as being postmodern sci-fi. Um, but in a broader sense, the story of this is really, really fascinating to me because it's rife with things that are basically just tropes of science fiction nowadays. You've got aliens, you've got robots, you've got time travel. It's all in here. But what I love so much about the Book of the New Sun is that it manages to take these kind of tired cliches and make them feel new and mysterious again. Like everything in this book feels alien, it feels exotic and foreign to us. And because of that, I really, really just respected the hell out of this book because it was able to do something new with old pieces. I mean, there are innumerable sci-fi books out there about time travel and aliens and robots, and at this point, it's kind of just like yawn. What else you got? But not so with the Book of the New Sun. It feels truly mysterious and cryptic, and I just absolutely loved it. So uh, to rate the Book of the New Sun, or the first two volumes of the Book of the New Sun at least, I'm going to give Shadow and Claw an A. I am. I love this so much. It is truly, truly literary. This was published in the early 1980s, and while science fiction at that point was getting to where it was being more accepted in the mainstream. That it's still a real feat that these books at that time were able to garner the acclaim that they did, and it's well earned because this isn't just science fiction. This is literary fiction as well, and also it's highly thoughtful, and that of course just adds to the literary value of it because there's an undercurrent to these books, and I'll wait to make any pronouncements about it because I'll have to see how it all comes together later on. But there is an undercurrent to these books of spirituality, and there's a lot made when you see these books discussed of the fact that Gene Wolfe himself was Catholic, and he's certainly not the first Catholic to write science fiction. I mean, Walter Miller wrote A Canticle for Leibowitz, and that's highly Catholic. But there definitely is a palpable sense of the spiritual with these, and I don't know that I would describe this as like Catholic fiction, and I don't even know that I would describe this as Christian fiction in the sense that we conceive of Christian fiction because there's far too much violence and sex in these books for it to fit that mold nicely. But rather, I think I would say that I would call this definitely theological fiction, and theological fiction that conforms to a pretty clearly Christian cosmology. And there's so much little asides, there are so many little asides and so much discussion throughout these books of kind of the nature of God or whether God truly exists and what the intentions of God may or may not be. And it really gives some real meat to the bones of this story. It's very thoughtful. It really is. It's very ponderous, and it's engaging with issues of great import, I think. So overall, my reading of the first two volumes of the Book of the New Sun was a smashing success. I'm giving Shadow and Claw once again an A. I just love this to death. This is science fiction as it should be. It feels truly like exotic and foreign, even though it's playing with things that you've seen probably umpteen times before encountering this. But it makes it all feel new again. The main character is not the most likable protagonist because I probably should have touched on that. Severian in these books is a real piece of shit. Like he really is. He is an exceedingly dislikable protagonist, but he is a very complex and very intriguing protagonist as well. And that's what really counts. Even though, like I said, he really is just not a good person in these books. He does some things that are kind of admirable, but then he does a lot of other stuff in these books that are very, very kind of despicable. So did not like Severian very much, although his journey more than had me hooked. I loved this so much. I'm trying to remember like the last sci-fi book that I read, and I think that may have been Greg Bear's City at the End of Time, which was just a crushing disappointment. And this is really this is science fiction rebound for me because that book sucked, but these books, or at least the first two of these books, kick ass. So yeah, I'm giving Shadow and Claw an A. This was just a fantastic read for me, a real knockout. And this is science fiction as I like to see science fiction most. So, uh, Shadow and Claw, or really the Book of the New Sun overall, have you read it? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said here today. And if you haven't read Shadow and Claw, well, I'll hold off on recommending it yet because it is entirely possible, I suppose, that the series just crashes and burns in the next books. So I'll hold off on saying that I recommend it until I see how it wraps up. But right now, I think it's leaning towards something that I could probably recommend. But as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.